The UN Security Council, the United Nations in general, is treated with disdain by the Israelis. They say that this is an organization that has a lopsided attitude towards Israel.
You know that meme when like one friend of yours tells you that your new hairstyle looks like shit, and you're like, they're just being mean, they're a cunt, they're like an asshole. My haircut is probably nice. And then another friend comes and tells you, yo, dude, what the fuck did you do with your hair, man? You look fucking ridiculous. And you're like, no, you're still in denial and so on. And then a few weeks pass and there's 10 of your friends that came to you and said, my man, you look like shit. And even after 10 different fucking people have told you that maybe you shouldn't cut your hair that way. No. Only a fucking narcissoid sociopath will continue believing that, no, he's the one who's correct. The 10 people must be absolute fucking cretins. This is Israel but on steroids, and instead of haircuts, it's mass murder, genocide, and apartheid. And instead of friends, it's literally 95% of the planet's nations. Let's go into some of the first topics of the day. So are we supposed to be optimistic about the US submitting a resolution about ceasefire to the UN? Let's look at our good old Al Jazeera and see what they tell us. Shall we? Sounds like a plan.
The United States has submitted a draft resolution to the UN Security Council, which appears to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the resolution is linked to the release of captives. He made the comments following a visit to Saudi Arabia. It's part of a wider trip to the Middle East where Blinken is holding talks on ending the war on Gaza. The U.S. has previously vetoed attempts at the Security Council to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. For more on this, let's bring in our diplomatic editor, James Space. Tell us more first, James, about what's in this draft U.S. resolution.
So hopefully this is not just like them throwing a bunch of already rotting food from a chopper that can't even feed 1,000 people. And it's not just a, little bit of spice on top that they can use as domestic propaganda locally, because they realize that the Democratic Party is making itself even more unelectable due to their continued not only silence but direct support of Israeli troops and the horrors that our Palestinian brothers and sisters are experiencing over in the Strip. Time will tell, but let's see what much wiser analysts that wear suits and have receding hairlines, which that immediately makes you more respectable, have to say on the topic.
That's circulating at the UN.
Well, comments have come from Secretary of State Blinken, who's in the region, and we have the resolution that is in New York. Let me first tell you what the US Secretary of State said in an interview with an Arabic TV channel before he left Saudi Arabia. We're pressing for an immediate ceasefire tied to the release of the hostages. In fact, we've actually put forward a resolution right now before the UN Security Council that does call for an immediate ceasefire tied to the release of hostages. Well, a couple of hours ago, Al Jazeera obtained this, which is a copy, we believe, of the latest US resolution. I think the language is important. So let me read you the key point of the resolution. It says the Security Council determines the imperative of an immediate and sustained ceasefire to protect civilians on all sides, allow for the delivery of essential humanitarian assistance and alleviate humanitarian suffering, and towards that end unequivocally supports ongoing international diplomatic efforts to secure such a ceasefire in connection with the release of all the remaining hostages. I think that's important because normally when you get a ceasefire, and the other ceasefire resolutions that have come from other parties other than the US, they demand a ceasefire. This one, the Security Council determines the imperative, i.e. it says it's important that there is a ceasefire. It doesn't seem to be demanding one, and it's also linking this ceasefire directly with the release of the remaining captives being held by Hamas and other groups in Gaza. So it's a little bit more complicated than the Secretary of State made it sound in that TV interview.
So what Blinken is saying is somewhat different to what's in the draft resolution that's circulating at the UN. But this is still significant, all of this, given the previous US vetoes at the Security Council on Gaza.
And I think things are changing. I think things are changing in two ways. One, we have those very important talks in Doha. Secretary Blinken also says he believes the gap is being narrowed. It may well be that the US is planning to put this resolution forward after They've got a deal here in Doha. The other thing is that this is...
And after they had blocked all the previous resolutions calling on a ceasefire. Them linking it directly, at least my first point, immediate analysis of this, is them linking it to the hostage release is so that they can take care of their voting population, which is inherently pro-Israel, because to them they can sell it as a policy that they're putting forwards because they want to get Israeli hostages out. And ceasefire, which to me is right now sounding like a temporary ceasefire. They're not calling really for a permanent ceasefire, which is very different, very fucking different. These guys know exactly what they're writing, so that they can alleviate the kind of hatred directed rightfully at them by the pro-Palestinian side of their voting body, which is growing and growing as we know at this point. What has changed since the last resolution? Well, a bunch of fucking more children and women and innocent men have died, and that was absolutely unacceptable kind of consequence that they were willing to live with in order to wait long enough so that they can push this out now while continuing to say that they still stand strongly with Israel, because the reason they're doing this is to help the hostages, etc., etc. This is sounding like a very temporary thing where they want to basically shut up domestic agitation against the Democratic Party on the basis of, hey, we can't vote for you because of what you're supporting in Gaza, because they can point to this and say, hey, we are actually doing something, but let me be lib Yugopnik for a bit. Even a temporary ceasefire, if it saves even one life, I am all for it, no matter how much the dogs over in Washington are going to use it as just propaganda fuel for their campaign. So let's see what happens.
It's not the only resolution floating around the Security Council. The elected members of the Security...
And the fact that they have to write a separate resolution than the ones that the 50 ones that at this point have been passed by everybody, only downvoted by the United States and a few fucking island nations, shows that not only do they want to satisfy their domestic voting base, but they also want to appear strong because they are the ones putting forward the resolution. So if it gets voted out, it is going to be the United States that actually managed to ensure a ceasefire, even though the whole world was screaming, let's do this maybe before more and more thousands of people are starved to death or are bombed out of their fucking existence. But no. Waiting to them and those lives lost were very much so worth it.
Security Council, the 10 members who aren't permanent, just served 2 years, they've had enough. They've got together, they've drawn up a resolution. They're close, I believe, to putting that one to a vote, demanding an immediate ceasefire with no complication in the language whatsoever. Two of those permanent, elected 10 members, Japan and South Korea, are a little bit hesitant because they're very close US allies and they don't want to further antagonize the US. And France is also working on a resolution, we understand it. And my understanding also is the US, I think, is very hesitant about the idea of yet again, given what they've heard about famine coming to Gaza, what we've heard from the International Court of Justice, very, very worried that it might have to use its veto again. So I think that's why this US resolution, which has been in the works for some weeks now has tougher language Israel won't like.
Them having to put forward another resolution after there was plenty of resolutions that could be acceptable, just continuous metaphoric US strongman mentality, God fucking damn it.
But is it language that would force an immediate ceasefire? I think we need to ask some more questions today while the Secretary of State is in Cairo.
Right, diplomacy then at the UN, but also in the region, Cairo.
Yes, and it's extremely concerning, like, even if they pass it, Israel, which is at this point defined the UN as irrelevant to their policies and as an institution that is de facto anti-Israeli, UN do be supporting Hamas, am I right? It's going to be very interesting to see if this resolution is passed, if the 51st United States state, Israel, is actually going to follow through on it. And in the case that they refuse to follow through on it because of some hardliners, which, by the way, that is a stupid word to use for an apartheid state. The fact that you are a politician in an apartheid state de facto makes you a hardliner. You're doing a bit of racism. That's pretty hardline to me. Not just doing it, fucking institutionalizing it. It's going to be interesting to see how it can actually be, actively forced upon Israel in case it says no. But as we know, the Israelis listen to the other 50 states most of the time when they issue policies, even though they sometimes disagreed during the previous few Nakbas that they have done.
The Secretary of State meeting a number of regional leaders there, and there is hope, cautious hope, it would seem, about a ceasefire deal being achieved in the coming days.
Wonderful.
Ceasefire talks, the technical talks on the ceasefire continue.
Thank you, Philly Houston, for
subbing
subbing for 2 months.
But it is both Qatar and Egypt who've been the key mediators here. I think they are also looking at the Palestinian Authority, how that can be reorganised, revitalised. Now it has a new Prime Minister. And then how you potentially look at the governance of Gaza after a war. And then, this seems a long way off, but trying to get political talks back on track for that two-state solution.
Exactly, and the U.S. being the one to push the ceasefire, even if it at one point becomes permanent, will allow them a place on the table, a very important place at the table that they always will have when it comes to any sort of negotiation with what actually happens to the Palestinian people in the apartheid colonial project of Israel. But with this, they can also quote, hey, we did our part to stop this war, because if they hadn't done their part to stop this war, quote unquote, even though they've done very much so their part on proliferating it, this ethnic cleansing campaign, not war, I apologize, other countries would be able to pinpoint and say, yo, what the fuck are you doing at the negotiating table when you're obviously extremely biased towards one side? But again, if they are the ones that push a resolution, that they can quote that back at any UN opposition, etc., etc. And I'm not talking just out of my ass. This is done very, very commonly. And different UN resolutions are constantly used in diplomacy as a way to properly state what a country's position is on a particular conflict, which is very funny. They will use, the piece of paper that they made everybody vote on as an argument, but they will completely continue to ignore the fact that most of the lives lost there would not have been lost without the direct financial and military support towards Israel, which is very much so currently struggling without the Palestinian workforce and without its own workforce, which has been pushed into the Gaza Strip in order to commit genocide. So that's only like top of the cake. Like the companies leaving, them losing a lot of money, becoming a worse and worse, less likely place to invest in, doesn't help that either. But yeah, this is definitely going to allow the U.S. to have not only a seat at the table, but a leading seat on the table when it comes to this conversation.
Let's get the view now from occupied East Jerusalem and bring in Imran Khan, who's there for us. So Imran, this draft resolution and the reaction comments from the U.S. Secretary of State in
Thank you, the guy
Arabia.
Pat,
How's
for
that
this
all likely to go down with the Israelis? Will they be paying any attention?
Well, we've spoken to the Prime Minister's office. They've issued us a very terse no comment on this. We've also reached out to Benny Gantz, who's the former Prime Minister, and a key member of the War Cabinet. The same response from him as well. We've reached out to others within the government. They're likely to all follow suit. This is going to be certainly an official no-comment day by the looks of things. The UN Security Council, the United Nations in general, is treated with disdain by the Israelis. They say that this is an organization that has a lopsided attitude towards Israel when it comes to Israel. Since 2015, they say there have been about 140 resolutions against Israel, and it's something that...
You know that meme when like one friend of yours tells you that your new hairstyle looks like shit, and you're like, they're just being mean, they're a cunt, they're like an asshole, my haircut is probably nice. And then another friend comes and tells you, yo dude, what the fuck did you do with your hair, man? You look fucking ridiculous. And you're like, no, you're still in denial, and so on. And then a few weeks pass and there's 10 of your friends that came to you and said, my man, you look like shit. And even after 10 different fucking people that very often have common interests with you, your friends in this case, have told you that maybe you shouldn't cut your hair that way. No. Only a fucking narcissoid sociopath will continue believing that, no, he's the one who's correct. The 10 people must be absolute fucking cretins. This is Israel, but on steroids. And instead of haircuts, it's mass murder, genocide, and apartheid. And instead of friends, it's literally 95% of the planet's nations. No. It's not us who are wrong. It is 95% of the globe, of all of humanity. All of humanity's most corrupt and fucked up people, which is the leadership, right? Even they realize, holy shit, what's happening in Israel is absolutely fucking disgusting. But no, it's the UN. It's not me.
They've often dismissed the Israelis.
You're just jealous, yeah.
Are incredibly good at ignoring United Nations resolutions. However, this one is going to be incredibly difficult to ignore, given that it is coming from their key ally.
And what about Hamas, Imran? This draft resolution also relies on them agreeing to free hostages, will they?
And this is really smart on the Americans because they're throwing the ball over at Hamas, right? So if this does not pass, or if Hamas does not agree on releasing the hostages, then they can continue just pinpointing them as the evil, absolute, horrendous bad guy, and not the consequence of the material and social conditions of the Palestinian people in Gaza. But what's a bit scarier, if I want to put on the complete, not even black pill, but the death pill, if it's a temporary ceasefire and Hamas agrees to let all the hostages go, then the bombing campaign and absolute annihilation of Gaza, if the ceasefire is ever overturned, can be much more brutal, much more intense, and much more supported by even the so-called moderate wing of the Israeli populace, right? So that's the death pill. That's the potential 3D chess that they might be playing together with their Israeli comrades, which I really hope is not the case, because that is scary.
Well, it's all about the language. Hamas will be looking at this. They've made their position incredibly clear. They want a permanent ceasefire. This resolution doesn't call for a permanent ceasefire. What it does say is it wants an immediate ceasefire. But the interesting word there, and maybe this does give some wiggle room, is sustained ceasefire. Does that mean that every hostage that is released, for every set of hostages?
I mean, I'll tell you, I'm not the big brain journalist as you guys, but sustain means if we want to stop it, any sort of military or violent action by any Palestinian that we can somehow link to Hamas can allow us to remove this ceasefire, right? Any sort of minimum scandal can allow them to restart it. It gives them incredible leeway. That's it. There you go. Can I get a Al Jazeera salary now, please? Thank you.
Ceasefire gets extended. Well, that's what we saw during the last ceasefire, which Hamas actually accepted. But Hamas have also been very critical in the past of United Nations resolutions. Take a look at the one on December 22nd that was called...
Thank you, Kuwait, for another gifted sub.
Hamas
Thank you very much.
Didn't go far enough. So the language for Hamas is going to be very key. They're going to be looking at this. It is likely that they will reject it, given their previous positions. But this idea that it's an immediate but sustained ceasefire may well be something that Hamas might, and I stress the word might, be able to work with.
Imran, thank you very much for that. That's Imran Khan, live for us in occupied East Jerusalem.
Thank you, Imran. I'm a big fan of this guy. Beautiful quote by Tacos for Satan. What a name. History starts when we say it starts. And every state does this. Every state apparatus does this. Hey, we were here first in order to go and pillage and conquer and take, etc., etc. But I don't know. I was under the impression that is the 21st fucking century and that medieval mentality should no longer be applied as a decent enough reason for us to go to war. And in this case, not just war, but an absolute unadulterated ethnic cleansing campaign that has taken over 30,000 fucking lives in so few days. But when you look at the state of the world, especially colonial projects such as this, medieval fucking conquerors probably are looking up from hell and are like, Jesus, I wish I could do this efficiently. Let's see. With record of Gaza truce vetoes, U.S. unveils new ambiguous UN resolution after having vetoed it like 700 fucking times. Eyeing a prospective Israel-Hamas truce deal in Qatar, the U.S. draft resolution does not explicitly demand a ceasefire now. It does not explicitly demand a ceasefire now. The U.S. has circulated a draft UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire tied to the release of hostages in Gaza, according to UN Secretary of State. Israel's key political and military backer has repeatedly vetoed previous UNSC votes on ending the nearly 6-month war, quote-unquote, objecting as recently as February to the use of the term immediate in a draft submitted by Algeria, hence why we see the word immediate being stricken. In recent weeks, however, it has upped the pressure on Israel while insisting that Hamas fighters must immediately release the captives. Well, quote, well, in fact, we actually have a resolution that we put forward right now that's before the United Nations Security Council that does call for an immediate ceasefire tied to the release of hostages, and we hope very much that countries will support that, Blinken said in Saudi Arabia. What we said previously, they're going to use and milk this as a gotcha for any of their detractors that say that they haven't done absolutely anything to stop the genocide. I think that would send a strong message, a strong signal, he told Saudi media Al-Hadat on Wednesday. Of course, we stand with Israel and its right to defend itself. Oh, fucking word salad, fucking vomit through my asshole into my mouth. But at the same time, it's imperative that the civilians who are in harm's way and who are suffering so terribly, that we focus on them, that we make them a priority, protecting the civilians, getting them humanitarian assistance, Blinken said. I feel like when it gets to the point that even some liberals are critiquing the U.S., they would have to say something like, okay, guys, stop, please, for their own image, just a gut feeling. I mean, that's what, to an extent, they're doing right now. Their voting body is very much so turning more and more pro-Palestine, and that is obviously going to influence their policy, because those stupid cunts only care about themselves and they want to get fucking reelected. But they're going to fucking walk a very, very thin line, as they are doing with this particular resolution. And what we said previously, there is a very death pill that can be swallowed and maybe should be swallowed, and that if the hostages are released, they can just, swipe away the ceasefire under any sort of pretense and then completely level to an even greater extent, which I can't even imagine. How do you level to a greater extent the entirety of the Strip? Because now even their local so-called moderates over in Israel will no longer say, hey, we need to slow down because of our hostages. That argument will completely fly out the window. So yeah. A copy of the new draft resolution obtained by Al Jazeera reads, the Security Council determines the imperative of an immediate and sustained ceasefire to protect civilians on all sides, allows for the delivery of essential humanitarian assistance and alleviate humanitarian suffering, and towards that end unequivocally supports ongoing international diplomatic efforts to secure such a ceasefire in connection with the release of all remaining hostages. Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor James Bays said, while the development sounds very important, the exact language of the resolution is crucial. It's certainly the strongest language yet, but is it what the rest of the Security Council wants in terms of demand of an immediate ceasefire, or is it just a resolution where the Security Council would say an immediate ceasefire is something that's very important? Yes, I mean, somebody in the Security Council actually votes against this because they do not believe it will do enough, especially in the context that it's not a permanent ceasefire. They will again be able to use this as an argument. Hey, we did our part. Hey, local voting body, we did our part. Stop fucking pointing fingers at us. It's the people in the Security Council that disagreed with us, even though most likely the disagreement might come from them disagreeing with the wording of the actual fucking resolution. In February, the U.S. was the only country to vote against the draft, its third such veto, while the United Kingdom abstained. For a UNSC resolution to be adopted, it requires at least 9 votes in favor and no vetoes by any of the 5 permanent members. Linda Thomas, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, said that her country was vetoing the resolution over concerns it would jeopardize talks between the U.S., Egypt, Israel, and Qatar that were seeking to broker a pause in the war and the release of captives held in Gaza. Talks for a ceasefire deal were continuing in Qatar this week, following failed attempts to secure an agreement before the start of Ramadan. Qatari officials said that they were cautiously optimistic after discussions with Israeli intelligence chiefs, although Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ansari said on Tuesday that an Israel ground operation in Rafah, southern Gaza, would set back any talks. The language of other resolutions that U.S. has vetoed have demanded a ceasefire. This one uses the words determines the imperative. So it says it is important that there is a ceasefire. It is not really demanding one now, and it is not really demanding a permanent one, very, very importantly. Blinken is on his 6th tour to the Middle East since Israel's war on Gaza began. He already met Saudi Foreign Minister Prince bin Farhan and Crown Prince Mohammed. On Thursday, he's due to meet blah, blah, blah. Blinken is expected in Israel on Friday. So I guess on Friday, we're going to know more, because that's when we're going to talk to the representatives of the 51st United States state, which is the colonial project of Israel. And then we will see just how realistic this thing is. Yeah, this is to an extent the story. The resolution has been has been given. I want to be positive about it. Even if it's temporary, it will lead to less death, at least. And again, the minus is that this might be used for them to pacify all the beautiful souls over in America that have been protesting against this ethnic cleansing campaign, so that they can continue with business as pretty much usual. Which leads us into the next topic of conversation, from one insane ethnic cleansing state to another. Let's look at the history of the enduring allure of fascism, the slithering snake-like ability for fascists to restructure themselves from one system into another, and check out a video by a great friend of the show, Bess D. Marks, another Balkanoid, called How Nazism Survived in Germany. Let's do some history, because history informs what we know today, and without it